Welcome to another edition of Trunk and Tales as we navigate what is happening in the world of politics. I'm Stacy Smith, and if you're watching or listening to this podcast, I ask that you hit the like or the subscribe button. President Trump has been in office now for more than 100 days. We'll have a report card, and we'll talk about Joe Biden's fitness for office and the decision to run for re-election. It is coming up in this edition of Trunk and Tales. And with me to talk about this is my panel of political analysts and experts, and they are the former governor of Pennsylvania, a Republican, Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett also served as the state attorney general and also as the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Mr. Corbett teaches law right now at Duquesne University. Also joining me on the Democratic side is the former Pennsylvania Auditor General, Eugene DePasquale. Eugene held that office for 8 years, and prior to that, he was elected to the state legislature. He now teaches at Pitt and also at York College. Keith Schmidt was the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith also consulted on Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign. Keith has his own consulting firm. And Joe Mystic joins us. Joe's background includes consulting Democrats across the state and serving in city government. Joe teaches law, and you can read his thoughts on life and politics every Sunday in the Tribune Review. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a while since we've gotten together. I hope everybody's doing well.
Great. It's taken us a while as Democrats to get our own general on this podcast.
Well, you finally have one now.
Yeah. Finally got a general.
Yeah. The playing field is level now, okay?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that.
No. Well, one got the promotion to governor, so I'm not sure about the level playing field.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, since President Trump...
That the governor returned to his seat because I thought we were in the middle of a walkout I wasn't aware of. I didn't even have to face these two alone, or did I not get the memo?
Keith, you remember when Ed Zamprelli and I walked out on you?
I knew you were going to say. You had the courtesy to tell me.
Yeah, I told you in advance. Yeah.
Keith, it's all about the woodpeckers attacking my house.
Oh, man. Well, since the president...
Let us begin, Stacy.
Oh, I'm trying to.
I know.
Since President Trump was inaugurated, Keith Schmidt has said numerous times that we should wait to don't make any early judgments on how well the president is doing until after he's had 100 days in office. Well, Keith, it's now been more than 100 days in office for President Trump in his second term. So let's hear what you think about him right now, your judgment.
Well, I bought time until now, I guess. I should have to be over 100. I would say, to be honest with you, it's still very early, but there are signs that I see that are encouraging. Yesterday, NPR reported that consumer confidence was up 14% in the last 6 months, which was a remarkable jump in people's opinion of where the economy is heading. Last month, the inflation rate dipped to 2.3%, the lowest since February of 2021. That's a good thing. Gas prices are down. The energy market pretty much has been unleashed. As of yesterday, I saw that the stock market topped 42,000. Pretty much, I think 300 or 400 over 42,000. I was encouraged a couple weeks ago to learn that the last living American hostage left Gaza and was released. And of course, the big one for Trump that you hear him tout, not as much as I'm surprised that I actually thought I'd hear more about it, that for the first time in many years, more illegal immigrants are leaving the country than entering the country. So that's certainly a positive thing. And we're in the midst of an enormous budget debate, and his credibility in the party, I think, is still holding up because we have pretty much an equally divided House. It's hard to pass anything, and his budget made it through, largely obviously on partisan lines, but it's tough to hold that crew together, especially in the House. There's a lot of independent groups there and people that don't completely share the president's vision. But the whips did their job, and it's now in the Senate's hands, and we'll see if they can pass this budget before July 4th. So there are some encouraging signs that what Mr. Trump Mr. Trump's agenda is starting to take hold. I know there's a lot of angst over the trade deals, but there's a lot of America that still believes we're negotiating fair trade deals. And I'm still waiting for this to completely play out. But on previous broadcasts, I mentioned time and time again, I think the largest part of this piece of trade is all about China. China is both our economic and military enemy. And I think these trade wars are largely based on what we need to achieve with communist China.
All right, that's a long, long list of positives you just gave for the president. I just have this sneaky suspicion
Can I walk out now?
that Joe Mystic and Eugene T. Pasquale have some different takes on the president's first 100 days. Joe, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the price of eggs to go down, and I'm also waiting for him to end that war. He said he was going to end the war in the Ukraine in 24 hours. The last I heard, he threw his hands up in the air and said, "I quit. We're going to let the Pope give it a shot," which I think is a major failure in the. I think the betrayal of those voters who voted for him because they thought he was going to bring peace to that part of the world. It's in his tariffs, he's changed direction on multiple times. I mean, they're on, they're off, they're on, they're off. But I think the thing we have to worry about in terms of the distant future is this brain drain. He's chasing scientists. He's chasing the smartest people in the world out of America. They're being recruited by Canada. They're being recruited by Ireland. They're being recruited by some European countries who've actually put together formal programs to take the people that Trump has chased away. And this is our future. And I think that in long-term strategy, this will be the most devastating thing that's happened to us.
Yeah, Stacy. So first of all, I do think that Keith brought up a lot of those stats, and I think they are accurate. I mean, and I think part of that is that Trump has rightfully got away from sort of this rightfully or wrongfully throwing these Molotov cocktails all over the place on these tariffs. And I think he's calmed down on that, which I think has helped calm down the markets and a whole host of other issues. Then, if he goes back to that, I think we're going to be back to this, chaos on that. So I think I think you've seen sort of a lull on that, and him being shrewder on the tariff side of it and negotiating it deal by deal. And I think people understand that. Where they're playing with fire is two parts. One is the budget that passed the House. If Medicaid cuts do go through, and I know that there's a Senate, there's a whole process still to play out. I'm telling you, that is political fire. A big chunk. First of all, I think it's wrong policy-wise. If they want to get people that shouldn't be on it and weed that out, but the way they're adding those barriers to Medicaid, they will be kicking people off of health insurance. A big chunk of them will be his base. But I think no matter who they vote for, I'd have a personal issue with it. But I think he's playing with fire with Medicaid. Secondly, look, and I get the politics of fighting with Harvard. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people that cheer when you're fighting with Harvard. I get it. But there's a broader war on higher education. There's going after research, medical research, health research, that I just don't understand. And so you have on this two-part, I think Trump is starting to become a little bit more mainstream in how he's, in the last month, tackling the tariffs and broader economic policy, which I think is smarter for him than just him waking up one day getting mad at Ireland and tacking on a tariff because he didn't like, how they golfed at his golf course or something. He's gotten away from that. But this fight with higher education, and I think the House Republicans pushed him further to the right than he wanted to go on Medicaid. If that ends up going into law and he doesn't deliver on his tax cuts on the tips and Social Security, I think there'll be a lot of people waking up saying, that they bought into a con.
So I've been sitting watching this for almost 6 months now, five full months. And I'll make a couple observations. He campaigned on and has a number of principles that many people can agree with. The border was certainly one of them. The economy was another one. The war in Ukraine was another one. He had some good ideas. But he's petulant in how he goes about trying to implement them. He doesn't appear to listen to any advisors if they're willing to say, President, maybe you shouldn't do that, maybe you should do it this way. And he's learning a lesson in many of those, and the tariffs are a great example. He keeps pulling back on the tariffs. Now, he might come in and say, hey, I did that. That was a ploy. I did that. I got their attention, didn't I? Now we'll bring it back, and now I have them at the table. But the problem that creates is that he's unpredictable. He's unpredictable not only here within the country, but he's unpredictable outside the country to the other nations around the world. And that unpredictability falls to the United States as being unpredictable. And I don't think that's good for us.
No, it may not be good for the United States, but I have no idea if I'm correct on this or not, but it seems that's what he wants to be, is unpredictable. And I think he thinks of that as a negotiating tool. And the other aspect you bring up about the advisors, his set of advisors is entirely different than his first term. I mean, he had quote unquote mainstream kind of Republicans in there, and he doesn't have that kind of advice now.
Look, I know the governor had it when he was governor. I know I had it as Auditor General, and I know Keith and Joe when they were working for their principals. Sometimes you got to tell them things they don't want to hear. And in the first term, he had that, and I don't think he has that this time around. And you got to have somebody who can close the door, lock the door, whatever. I know as the president, there's Secret Service outside, but you get the point. That can say, boss, we love you, but I don't think this is the right way to go about it, and not have a fear of getting fired for that.
Well, he's a man in fool this time, isn't he? He's feeling his oats. He has no prospect of another term, in spite of what he says, just to make the progressives crazy, that he's going to run for a third term. He's feeling the power, and he's using it, and I'm afraid he's using it in some ways that aren't good for the long-term interests of America. We're known for our stability. We're that force. We're the stabilizing force in the world, and that's important, not just here, but globally. And I don't think he understands the difference between government and business. And this unpredictability, I think, has served him very well in business, but it doesn't suit us as a nation when the world has, for the last 50, 60, 70 years, I guess now, looked to us as that beacon, that foundation of liberty, the steady force in the world. And that's different than the posture one might take when you're trying to negotiate business deals.
Keith, wrap it up
for a second here. I appreciate Eugene saying that the long list was accurate, but there are concerns, and add that long list. I just went and got gas. Gas is down dramatically, but listen, I have to also be fair. It's not. There is some imperfect parts of this agenda that I think actually your listeners should know that even Democrats and Republicans can agree, because I think there's a unanimous support to take a longer look at Medicaid cuts. And I know that I could speak partially for the former governor and my friend, because not too long ago, a few weeks ago, he published an op-ed in the Philadelphia Inquirer on this very issue, and talking about the importance of Medicaid. And back in my years in the United States House and Senate with Senator Santorum, we fought the fight for rural health care aggressively, but we're at almost 18, 19 years. And as bad as it was then, it's 10 times worse now. Access to health care beyond the urban America is dwindling. And now we know that any rural hospital, over 50% of their budget is Medicaid. If it goes away, they go away. So we're deeply concerned about that, and deeply concerned about people's access to an emergency room or maternity ward or treatment for cancer. And all these could be at stake if a budget goes too far in cutting these things. Waste, fraud, and abuse, we all agree on. If you're ineligible, we agree on. But it looks to me that, and we agree that it looks like they've cut beyond that. And I think that correction, and I see some tea leaves, and I've been meeting and talking to people both in staff and in office in the United States Senate. I think you're going to see the Republicans address that in their version before it is passed into law. At least I do hope so.
Let me add into that. Let me add into that, because I think I'm the only one here that's done a budget in the billions. Balancing budgets are the most impossible thing to try and get through a legislature. You have the Congress, I had the General Assembly. Everybody has their interests. You want to cut, you want to spend here, you're moving things around. It is a pattern of negotiation. It is a flawed, very flawed process. And you have to try and take a long-term view, not just to your single budget this year. Where are you going 2, 3, 4 years to go? One of the reasons I didn't get reelected is the approach I took to budgeting was trying to build a sound budget to go into the years after, into a second term and after a second term. And I had difficulty with my own legislature. The point that he's making about Medicaid and Medicare is these are people who need help. Yes, is there fraud and abuse there? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. But you've got to be careful of the old saying, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In taking a look at this, and I've talked to some of my Republican congressmen that I know pretty well, I said, be careful where you're going. Because a lot of the people that you represent in the rural part of the state that voted for you are going to be affected by this decision. And sometimes, not regarding them, but sometimes I don't think Congress gets down into the nitty-gritty about how does that affect their people as much as, well, we got this budget, we increased it, we cut it, whatever. If we could find a different way to budget, that would be great. But I don't think there is a different way to budget.
Yeah. I want to follow up on the governor's point there, which is sometimes I jokingly refer to D.C. as Oz. It's the land of Oz. And, and they're making these magical decisions, but then there's actually these real-world implications for those decisions. Every member of Congress has great health care, every single one of them. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I mean, but they're living in a world where they are not actually impacted personally by Medicaid cuts or potential. We've seen it just in Delaware County, which is a Philadelphia suburban county, the implosion of the Crozer healthcare system. 2 hospitals just shut down. Now, I'm not here to say, that that's because of Congress, but this is what's coming to a neighborhood near you if they go too far on Medicaid. And I'll talk about specifically, and this is a rural part of the state, Elk County. Now, the governor and I have been there. I'm sure Keith's been there. Joe's probably been there. We've all been to Elk County. Great people. Oh, Keith's never been there.
He can't pay. He has to go there.
There's no way Joe's
I've never been there.
Okay. Keith, the governor and I have been there.
I think I've been there.
We're looking in a world right now where if you are a pregnant woman in most of Elk County, it takes you over an hour to get to a maternity facility. That's right now. That's before any potential cuts go in. And the governor and Keith know these numbers as well as I do. And the governor's right there. Is there fraud? Of course. I found some of that, and his administration, then took some of those recommendations and weeded that out. But if they go too far, rural Pennsylvania and rural America will be devastated by these hospital closings. That much I guarantee you.
All right, guys, we've gone way long on this particular subject. It's been a great discussion, though, and I'd like to come back to this because I have some other ideas for a future program. I was going to talk about the stock market. We kind of touched on that already, but I'd like to move on to this one. Perhaps it happens more than we know behind the scenes that a lot happens that the public doesn't know that happens behind the scenes, especially about how the presidency is run. As you guys well know, there are several books coming out now that have been published about the former president, Joe Biden's capabilities mentally, physically, and being able to be the president of the United States. So a lot of these books are bringing up some troubling facts. In fact, the book, The Original Sin, which was just released last week, details issues with the president's memory and stamina before he took the oath of office. So, Eugene, what is your insight on this?
they lied. When I say they, the people that knew the president lied. They lied to all of us. And as a Democrat and as an American, I will use appropriate language and say it ticks me off. They lied. They were, you would see this on TV, you'd see his bad moments, and you were sort of like, oh, he had a bad day. As if it was like Andrew McCutcheon, in 2015, having an 0 for 4 day or something like that. And they would try to convince you, when we're not around and we don't see it, he's really teaching Simone Biles how to be a gymnast, and he's training with Navy SEALs and all this other stuff. And then we saw that disastrous debate. Now, as someone who is not happy that President Trump is back in office, and, I think I had my own electoral implications of some of this stuff as well. But beyond that, they put the country at risk because of actually the idea of him running for another term, as we now know, is just simply crazy because some people, not every registered Democrat, but some people in D.C. and in Biden world lied because they wanted power. Period. End of story.
I'm not going to try to
you
give
can
them.
speculate as to where that is, but it was deep within the administration.
Right.
Frankly, my personal belief, it was deep within the family that they didn't want to let it go. And that's unfortunate because I think the family is the group that saw it more than anybody else. And if these books and articles are correct, the family's equally at fault as the people who, from the party, didn't let the country know what was going on.
According to Original
I'm
Sin,
told that
let me just say one thing, Keith. According to Original Sin, the book, there were 3 major advisors to the former president and Jill Biden who really pushed for the idea of the president running again. Go ahead, Keith.
we're all told that money is the root of all evil, but power is so much more intoxicating. Oof. And I'm not giving them an excuse, but we were just in leadership in our second term in the Senate, and as a young man, the amount of power vested in a leader in the United States Senate, I was awestruck by it. I bought into it. It was intoxicating to me, and I was just a state director in Pennsylvania. So I understand when you get that grip, you don't want to let go of it. And we talked on a previous program that, how do you get away with it? I said the executive branch is the one branch that can operate pretty much on the president's signature. You don't have to call anybody. You could be directed to do things by the presidential signature. So there is a way to operate, a administration without an activist president. But let me also say this. Not that I want to move on, but I know the lawyers on this podcast all say the same thing about juries, because I worry about, hey, how do you pick a jury? Juries, hey, 99 out of 100, they find a way, they get it right. And I think there was a jury last year. I think we all saw the meltdown. Mm-hmm. And I actually think his vice president paid a price for the meltdown. They thought then that they were misled. They were angry. And certain base Democrats left the party.
Right.
And they gave us Donald Trump, which is their worst nightmare, but it already played out. They paid a price for it. They're paying to a degree now. And I don't want the former president to pay any more of a price. If anything, he was manipulated and used, and now he has 4-stage cancer. So I'm not looking to make him. I don't think we need to pow on now. I think there was a verdict. It was loud and clear, and I think we have to find a way to move on.
To Keith's point, I think it was elder abuse putting him out there, borderline elder abuse.
Well, we're not the only nation that does this. We put our politicians on a pedestal. I think we forget that they're human beings too. I remember hearing similar stories about Ronald Reagan, who announced his dementia after he left office. But as you look back, there were signs that something was amiss. I immediately called for one of my heroes, Joe Biden, to step down and get out of the race after the debate, because it was a disastrous debate. We saw the human side of someone that I've always revered and trusted throughout his career. Weirdly, I was with him 2 weeks before the election. He was campaigning for Kamala Harris then, and he was witty, sharp, energetic, as good as I've ever seen him. I was in a room with 15 people and the president, and I was somewhat astonished by that. But when I spoke to a couple physicians who I know, they said that there's some sort of sundown syndrome or something like that, where you might be sharp during the day, but not so sharp at night. Where you sort of drop off the cliff at night. So, I feel real bad about this. I also hold it against the people around him for pushing him forward when they should have known better. As Keith says, man, when you're in that bubble, it could be the mayor's office. When you're in that bubble, you don't want to leave the bubble. Things are pretty nice in there.
Yeah, on your point about the timing, the books have also stated this, and the Wall Street Journal had this, several months before the debate. They had a major article quoting 30 or 40 different people that knew the president and what was going on, and of course it was just tossed to the side by the Biden administration. But to your point, all of these people all said that his schedule was between 10 and 4. And you didn't have much before 10 o'clock, and you didn't have much at all after 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
And that's not the presidency. The presidency is 24/7.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly right. Before we run out of time, we normally stay focused on national and sometimes state politics in this program, but I do want to spend a little bit of time here on the recent Democratic mayoral primary in the city of Pittsburgh. Reason is that a one-term progressive mayor was tossed out of office. Now, this follows the defeat of a progressive for district attorney. So, Joe, as a resident politician in the city of Pittsburgh, I ask you this. Is this a case of the progressive influence starting to wane in this area?
Well, I think the lesson here is that you can't rule by ideology. You can't govern by ideology when you're in a position like the mayor's office. If you're the mayor of a city, you have to run the city. And if you do that, if you pay attention to that and you do that well, there's a chance the voters may give you the flexibility to pursue some of your more ideological interests. But if you don't run the city, you'll never get to that. And that's what's happened here.
Yeah, I think I say this jokingly because Keith calls a lot of things right, but I think this is one where Keith and I called right, which is, I think about 6 months ago or 5 months ago when Keith and I said, this election really will not be about ideology. I'm not saying I had no role, but it'll be about what people think of the state of the city. And if people think the state of the city is heading in the right direction, the mayor will get reelected. And if it's not, he won't. And I think that verdict was probably almost baked in the cake about 4 months ago, where people didn't think the city was heading in the right direction. And to Joe's point, being mayor and any executive, the governor knows this as well as anybody, being an executive is blocking and tackling. You can be a little bit more ideological in Congress, even, a council member, certainly a state legislator, but when you're the executive, it's blocking and tackling. It's about picking up the trash. It's about paving the roads. That's what gets these things done. And yeah, if you do those things well, then sometimes the public will say, okay, I trust you on that. I'll let you go a little bit further in some of your other goals. But if you can't do the blocking and tackling, you're not going to get the chance to that.
Well, and the irony of this is that one of the reasons Peduto didn't get reelected from this Republican's perspective that doesn't live in the city is that he didn't perform the way the city anticipated or believed he should. And if he was a progressive, the progressives then turned on him with Gainey. I think Mayor Gainey's problem is, no offense to legislators, he was always a legislator before he became an executive. It's a vast different form, being the executive, where you have to make the decision. You build consensus to a certain point, but you have to make the decision. And he seems to have come under the influence of the progressives, doing everything the progressives have said, and he really hasn't reached out to the rest of the city the way I think he should have been reaching out to them, to the business community and so forth. Just turned them off. His fight with UPMC, his fight with the Post-Gazette, did nothing to help him. In fact, I think it solidified the opposition to him. Clearly, I think in the Republican part of this, but even within moderate Democrats.
Keith, you want to wrap this up for us?
Yeah, I agree with all my colleagues on this. Executive elections are different. President, governor, mayors, executives are held accountable. They probably get more blame than they should, but they also get all the credit. That's just the nature of it. People have an inherent expectation of an executive, and they hold them accountable. And the gov's right. This didn't start 4 years ago. The last term for Peduto wasn't a good term, and now we had a dismal term. So we had 8 years in which we were kind of we were in trouble, and we needed to turn the page. And that is where, when the criticism of this mayor aggressively with some money at the end attacked Corey, that dog don't hunt. They hold him accountable. They know about crime and the businesses leaving and homelessness and they know the issues that were right in front of them to see on a day-to-day basis. So they held him accountable for that. He couldn't escape that. And more importantly, every once in a while, a businessman and an outsider has a great resume to take over. But in this case, Pittsburghers were benefited by the fact that Corey had a long career. His father was a mayor. He had several terms on council. He was a county controller. They wanted somebody ready right now. That resume figured out, because they didn't want anybody to have to learn the job in the first 6 months or 12 months. And it looks like they've chose a mayor that can hit the ground running and start turning this dismal situation around, not only for the city, but for the entire region.
Joe, one final question, and then we have to end this. But the question is in that district attorney's race, and also in the Corey O'Connor's victory for the Democratic mayoral primary, it would appear that Republicans played a role to help those two individuals be elected. What does that say about the state of politics? I mean, all of a sudden, they have some power in what happens in the city.
Indeed, they do. They have a seat at the table these days. But for Republican help, led by Governor Corbett, in fact, District Attorney Steve Zappala would not have been reelected to another term. So, this is, when you have a divided party, as the Democrats are dealing with at this point, it's a golden opportunity for the Republicans to step up. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way our system's supposed to work. And perhaps the Democrats will eventually get their act together in light of that, rather than have to look elsewhere for help.
And by the way, to follow up on Joe's point, we've seen this in other parts of the country, and I think it even happened in Pennsylvania, where most Republicans thought Doug Mastriano was too extreme, so a lot of them chipped in to help Josh Shapiro to make sure he was the governor. And you've seen this in Laura Kelly, who's the governor of Kansas. You actually have a Democratic governor of Kansas. Why? A lot of Republican business leaders sided with the Democrats because they thought the Republican nominees were too extreme out there. So to me, I think it's a way of holding the extremes of both parties in check on some of this. And that is building coalitions, which is part of governing.
And I applaud the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Republicans within the city that understood the realistic nature of, we have to pick the best Democrat here. There is no chance to elect a Republican. We don't have a base here, that chose to switch parties for the primary and then switch back because they wanted a voice for their region, for their city. And it took courage, because the Republicans aren't, it's hard for them to register D, but they did because they wanted to tell Corey they're also ready for a new, fresh leadership and a new direction for Pittsburgh.
Good ending.
Go ahead.
I said good ending.
Yes, I think so as well. Thank you. We will continue our look at politics in our next episode. Again, if you are watching or listening to this program, I urge you that you hit that subscribe or the like button. Right now, that does it. Thanks again for joining us for this edition of Trunk and Tales, and we'll see you again soon.